everyone. Welcome back. Expanding the zone. Hard to believe. Here we are, Matt, at show 25. It's something we started here several months ago, and it continues to take off. The feedback's been terrific. If you're out there on your podcast app getting us, make sure you check us out sometime on the SVC Sports Zone Shayne. That's our YouTube channel at svcsportzone.com. And if you're watching us here on YouTube, as always, you want to make sure you have us on your phone there, wherever you get your podcast. We're out there. So, Matt, I want to jump right into it here. Show 25 is organization and coaching, or maybe just organization and leadership. We always tend to lean coaching here on Expanding the Zone, and I just can't say enough about the feedback. I almost put this show in last week, and we were talking about the championship characteristics that you find in the common threads there throughout all the programs, the elite programs you think of. But this week, we continue to get some feedback from a couple shows back there 2 weeks ago when we were talking why coaches quit. And I've had some conversations about different coaching situations that come up that maybe, weren't full show topics, but that the more and more I collected some info, this agenda just started to make sense to me. So as I welcome you to the show, I guess I just wanted to ask you, what's your take on some of the things I was throwing at you with the feedback that we've received from some people, and why you think this show can be a really good one here tonight?
Yeah, Shane, I mean, I think we've said all along, this show's driven really two ways by what's happening in the world of sports and then the feedback we get. And we've gotten, like you said, a lot of feedback on the Why Coaches Quit show, and just basically things along the lines of, could you give some more specific details about some of these things, or can you dive in a little bit to maybe why some coaches handle things better than others, or why coaches don't quit, right? Some of those types of things. So it was interesting feedback, and we thought, in all honesty, as we started going through it, we felt like, there may be enough here for an entire show. So that's sort of what we're doing tonight.
Yeah, again, we're referring to show 23 there a couple of weeks ago, and last week we even talked about a lot of the different things that coaches do so well in these championship programs. And Matt, I think when I look back at my notes from 2 weeks ago, my summary points were probably, why coaches quit. We don't manage time very well, we don't manage stress very well, and there's a lot of different things that go into that. And some of those details are what we're going to get in here to tonight. I wanted to ask you a question that maybe I regret not asking you there on that show that particular week. We spent so much time talking about why coaches quit. I'm almost curious to see why coaches don't quit. If I were to go back and ask a young Matt Combs, what as a young coach almost drove you out of coaching? Because I think if anybody's being honest with themselves, there's always that time somewhere in your career where you're alone in your car after a tough practice, tough loss, whatever, alone in your apartment, whatever, and you're thinking, man, am I doing the right thing? Am I cut out for this? And can you share a moment maybe early in your career where that ever crossed your mind, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, I never really thought about quitting due to like some of the things we're going to talk about tonight in terms of, the extra stress on coaches from other responsibilities outside of coaching. For me, my career started kind of oddly. It was kind of an odd start in terms of I got a super big dose of humility right out of the gate. I mean, I think all of us, when we coach JV or freshmen, and you end up winning all but a couple games every year, or you have some success at those levels, you think, oh, I've got this coaching thing down. We can come in here, and then all of a sudden, for me, we started 0-7 in my first year as a coach, and you start to doubt your ability to do the job. I look back, I'm thankful for the humility, because I think that's important as a coach to get a dose of that early on and understand that this isn't easy, and winning's certainly not easy. Building a successful program is not easy. But I think at the same time, with that humility, when you're a young coach, comes a lot of doubt. You doubt yourself, and you start to wonder, man, maybe I'm not good enough to do this. Maybe I'm not cut out to do this. And for me, fortunately, we talked about this in show 23 we talked about the importance of having mentors, right? People on your side. for me, I was very fortunate to have some people that could give me good sound advice when I was going through that as a young coach. And really, I wasn't fortunate enough to have a winning season until my third year. And so those first couple years at two different schools were difficult, but luckily had some, just like I said, some people to lean on for advice to get me through those times.
Well, I think that's really interesting as I hear you talk, because I know one thing you won't talk about, so I will, is, it's been 2 decades now since you've had a losing season, and I see that drive in you still and that humble approach, and I think I think what you just described is probably the root of all of that, and that's what's really impressive. I think when I go back to a young coach, maybe the one thing I didn't share is learning that quantity versus quality debate that coaches really need to look in the mirror and figure out what that means. I know if I'm being just as truthful as ever, I probably, as much as I love the game of basketball, I probably had a little bit of burnout right around 7, 8 years into my career. And what's funny about that, Matt, when I stopped to do the math, 8 years into my career at the varsity level was 26 years old. You know what I'm saying? So it was one of those where there's probably a lot of factors that, again, maybe from a basketball standpoint, I was ready. Maybe from some of those other things that you're describing, maybe I wasn't. And I wanted to ask you about, we put these countless hours in, and I'm still a little guilty of it sometimes, with my drive and my competitive spirit and so forth. And I have to kind of remind myself and get that checks and balances. But, sometimes you can do in an hour and a half of film what you think you need 4 hours for. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes in a scouting report, you're ready. You don't have to do this, 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 or this. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about where you have found that in your career in terms of where you've been able to balance those things and understand, maybe work a little bit more efficiently.
Well, oddly enough, the word I was going to say was efficient. I mean, it's so important as a coach to be, really efficient in your time, because there are things that you just can't cut corners on, and there's things that take time. I mean, you're going to have to, as a coach, if you're doing the job correctly, there is a certain amount of film that has to be watched. Like you said, there may be a more efficient way to do it, but you got to watch film on yourself. You got to watch film on your opponents. There has to be a certain level of, or a certain amount of time put into your practice planning, your pre-practice meeting prep, with your team. But see, I always looked at it this way. I mean, I probably take 40 to 45 minutes a day, honestly, to put together a practice plan, which may seem excessive, but my thing is this: if I put together that practice plan, that allows my practice to be more efficient. So now, instead of my practice being 2 hours, my practice can be an hour and a half, and I get the same amount of stuff in. So yeah, that extra prep time saves time on the back end, if that makes sense, at practice.
Absolutely.
So it's like, it's that you see this a lot, and I see this a lot in practices where, coaches will go 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And I just don't see the point in that most of the time. Now, I'm going to be honest, in the preseason, there may be some times that has to happen, especially depending on the sport you coach. I just don't, I just feel like if coaches are using their time effectively and efficiently, you should be able to get in, get out within an hour and a half and get a lot done. Now, you tell me though, Shayne, in sports like baseball that you've coached for so long, there's probably some times in the preseason where it can't be avoided if you're trying to get guys through the cage and then you're trying to get out on the field for some reps and you're trying to do some base running. I mean, no matter how efficient you are there times where practices just have to be long and all that? I mean, but you see what I'm getting at, though. I mean, as the season goes, if you handle your time wisely, don't you think you can shorten the amount of time you demand of yourself and your kids?
Well, you do, and I think what happens in some sports, it can be you have that team time, but then you have those position breakdowns. That's one thing I try to do, is I really try to respect my players in terms of their time.
Right.
It's one of those things where we may have, throughout the preseason, we may have extra pitching and catching sessions, or we may just have hitting sessions and different things. And if it's a situation where you're hitting that day and you get our goal amount of cuts and the different things in there, we can get you out of there. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. And I think what you're describing is important for coaching. It's important for players in their individual work. I think it's important for, say, administrators in terms of handling staff. I think if you're a business person handling your employees, the respect of time and then the managing of time, I think, is really, really important, because I think that's where the overkill can come from, and it ends up being counterproductive when people, you know what I'm saying, they're not quite invested in exactly what it is you're trying, like, to use the baseball analogy. If a kid gets a really good amount of cuts in on a particular thing, let's say we're working on two-strike hitting, and we're going to stay inside the baseball, we're going to push the ball the other way, or we're going, whatever it might be. If I make him just stay there for another 20 minutes doing it just to do it, well, what's going to happen now is the bad habits are going to form, right? You're not getting the same investment in cuts and so forth. So I think learning how to utilize the quality reps, there's certainly a balance there. I think the next thing I wanted to ask you, Matt, is take me through. I want to talk about this so that we can make a point here. So take me through, maybe, if it's Sunday evening, Monday morning, somewhere in there, you're getting ready to prepare a full week for a Friday night league opponent. Take me through kind of a scouting or how the practice comes together, how much you want to know, how much you share with your coaches, how much you share with your players. And then I want to kind of build off that a little bit from something on some feedback from 2 weeks ago.
Well, basketball is a funny sport because the example you just gave, you only get every now and then, right? I mean, because a lot of times you have a Tuesday game, and you have,
right,
but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you're playing, that you have 4 prep days or whatever, Monday through Thursday. I think that we talked about this a little bit in one of our other shows, where you work from big to small, or you work backwards a little bit. Hey, what do we want? Where do we want to be at by week's end? What do we've got to work on this week? And then you start putting together sort of your weekly plan, your daily plan. And then you mentioned scouting. I think obviously you have a scouting report. You should, probably have that ready by the time you get into, your first day of practice, getting ready for that other team. The sharing with your kids is an interesting topic, because I think coaches have different philosophies on this. I know there are some coaches that just give everything to their players. Here it is. I've seen coaches pass out 5 to 7 page scouting reports and all that. That's not necessarily what I do, but that doesn't mean that that's not right. I mean, I just think coaches take different approaches. I guess I've always felt like you can give so much information that none of it gets through, or not. To me, I want certain specific things to get through to my guys. So, like, rather than give them 5-page scouting report, I'd rather give them a 1-page with like 4 or 5 bullet points that I want them to focus on the most. It's funny, when we get into game management later, I'm going to talk a little bit about some things with our current situation that I think falls into this, where if we're not careful, there's so many things going on around us that we have a hard time focusing on what we're supposed to be focusing on. I think it's like that with kids too, getting ready for an opponent. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I've sensed it with my guys before. Like, if I throw too much at them, maybe they don't focus on the details, that I want them to focus on. So I think sometimes I don't think you can necessarily overdo the prep for you as a coaching staff,
right?
But I think sometimes you can bury your kids in information if you're not careful, rather than just giving them the things you really want them to be in tune with.
Well, and I would go as far to say, I don't know that every single kid has to have the same. It's no different than teaching, right? We all have those students that are higher level. We have those that maybe struggle a little bit, and we use different approaches each and every day in the classroom. And I kind of apply that to my coaching. I mean, if we're attacking, my pitcher and catcher may need to know some more details about the opponent's lineup. I don't know if my left fielder needs to know exactly how, we're going to set up and attack certain hitters, because all he's got to do is, look at his little cheat sheet card, or look at our signals from the dugout and play. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where, because again, sometimes you can overwhelm. I guess the next thing I would ask you is, what role, moving from scouting report into game management, take this wherever you want to, what role do you empower your coaches to be a part of this particular thing? And And do you think sometimes people have a little trust giving up that power, and some of that is where some of this, I think we talked about that on the show 2 weeks ago. How do you empower your coaches to be a part of this process?
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to, like you said, we did talk about a little bit of the delegation and some things. And it depends probably on your coaching staff and the amount of time you've been together and the trust that's been built and all that. But I think, to me, I've always felt like this. Why have a coaching staff if you're not going to use them? I just, in all honesty, I mean, you have to put those guys to use, and they have something to offer, and you've got to figure out as a head coach what that is and what they're comfortable doing. But I think with scouting and stuff like that, it's just a lot easier when you're breaking down a lot of film, either on yourself or your opponent, to have more than one set of eyes on that. Obviously, again, it goes back to that efficiency where if one person's trying to do all that, it's very, very time consuming. That's like you talked about. Sometimes it can get overwhelming to the point where you get a little bit of burnout or just, man, I've got too much on my plate. And that's where you really have to use your coaching staff effectively. I mean, as you get into game management stuff, I mean, I suppose I suppose it's what you're looking for there. I mean, if you're talking about in-game stuff like what you do on the bench and what responsibilities you
Well, for
have.
example, you give some assistants some power to make certain calls and different things, right? I know some baseball coaches will have people that call
Right.
every pitch. Some people, are defense, you know, just there's a lot of different things. But I'm saying, you certainly empower coaches to be very much a part of what's going on in the play by play of calling out the particular strategies, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two levels of game management. There's that end game, like literally competitive stuff where you're trying to manage it,
Right.
and then there's the game management of what do you do to get ready for the game that day, your pregame, your bus rides, your team meals, all those things. So I guess that's a whole. Maybe we'll touch on that in a second, but it's like that end game stuff you're talking about. Yeah, again, I mean, I think you got to, for me, I've been fortunate to have coaches around for a while that I've gotten to know and trust, and it's easy to give up some of those responsibilities. But yeah, I think you got to figure out, man, I've got this guy over here who's great offensive mind. I'm gonna, he's gonna handle that side of things for me a little bit, or like you said, depending on the sport, right? I mean, football sort of is always done. I've always looked at football. I think in terms of like end game management, football sort of gets it. Like football, if you think about it, the idea of somebody's in charge of the offense and somebody's in charge of the defense, and then ideally, now I know at the high school level sometimes you're one of the head coach is one of the coordinators, but ideally I think the head coach needs to worry about maybe a substitution or a time, how we're going to use our timeouts, or making sure that everybody's in the right frame of mind. I mean, I'll watch football sometimes, and I think, you got 50 kids there on the team, and 35 of them are on the sideline or whatever, and something going wrong. Kid throws his helmet, people freaking out. I think sometimes the best programs are the ones where the head coach is almost a manager of people, and then you have your coordinators sort of doing some of that other stuff. Don't you think some of that's filtered into other sports? Because I see some of that in basketball now, where coaches where somebody sort of takes the offense. You'll see a guy on a bench that you can tell the offensive side of things is what he's doing. Or like in baseball, maybe a coach is designated to be that guy who positions all defensive players during an inning. Or, you see what I'm saying? I think
It
I
makes a
think
lot. What about substitution? I know in one of our pieces of feedback, some people were saying in certain sports they coach, it was a lot easier to make a lineup card like in baseball, where you could kind of say, okay, in the fourth inning, I'm going to play this kid to make sure I get him in if I'm coaching at a younger level and so forth.
mm-hmm.
Whereas in basketball, they said the first time as a young basketball coach they started to go, their head was spinning. They meant to go like 9 deep that night as a junior high basketball coach, and they went 6. You know what I'm saying? Before
Well,
they knew it,
I
they
can
looked up
tell
and it
you
was the
that,
third
yeah.
quarter. So, like, what about substitution?
Yeah, I feel like even to this day, I feel like the toughest part of being a basketball coach is really knowing who to play and when to play them. I've always said that. I think it's just the
Wow.
toughest
Yeah.
thing. I mean, because let's face it, we've all seen those situations where you put a kid in a game and he catches fire, knocks a couple shots down, and people will say, "Oh, that coach pulled the right string there. He put that guy in." And you're thinking to yourself, I just put him in, man. I got lucky. You know what I mean? Kid hit a couple shots. But it's like, really knowing who to play, when to play him. How much you got a guy that plays a lot of minutes for you and he's struggling. When do you pull the plug on him a little bit that night, take him out? There's a lot going on. And especially, like you say, in a sport like basketball where, theoretically you can put a kid in and out as much as you want, whenever you want, for whoever you want. And like you say, unlike maybe baseball where the substitutions are a little bit different, or even in volleyball, maybe where substitutions are a little bit different. I mean, basketball is one of those sports where there's a lot of in and out, right? There's a lot of players going in and out of the game, and trying to figure that out sometimes is really difficult. I mean, I think every coach wants to be like eight or nine deep, but every coach will probably tell you in their most honest moment, if I was only six deep, that'd be one less thing to worry about. All I got to do is,
Right.
but no one really wants that because, foul trouble, injuries, things like that. But when you're 9 or 10 deep, guess what? You got 9 or 10 kids wanting to play.
Right.
And you're trying to figure out how to juggle that while you're trying to figure out what play to call, what out of bounds play to run, what defense to run, when to use your timeouts. That's why I'm saying you really have to use your assistant coaches to take on some of those things for you. Like I have an assistant coach that just calls all out of bounds plays. And I mean, I trust him to do that. I'm not going to, that's one thing I'm not going to spend time thinking. I trust him to do it. He's going to do it. Now it's in our scouting report. These are the things these are the out of bounds plays we run. We think will work against these guys. And these are the ones that won't. He knows that going in, but once the game starts, that's his baby, and I think coaches have to do more of that to be able to handle that in-game management.
Well, I know you want to come back to some in-game management, but real quick, because I know that's going to kind of be a different lane. Let me ask you a couple of these things. I think talking about being yourself and being true to who you are and your personality, I know you probably fall somewhere in the middle. I know you and I've almost helped each other a lot in professional development. I'm probably a little bit more, picky on certain details where you're probably a little looser, and then we kind of go back and forth. But like, where do you fall on the game day routines? What we wear to school, how we travel, where we're sitting, what time you want them down there. Like one of the biggest things that's kind of really changed in my career is these kids that, will just be walking out or into the gym in their uniform during the varsity or during the JV game. I mean, it's one of the,
Right.
Where do you stand on all of that stuff in today's culture when it comes to some of the pregame routines or game day routines?
I guess the way I've always thought about this stuff, and I look at this from two different lenses. Everything I look at, does it affect winning or losing? That's one thing I look at. And then the other thing is, it's when appearance becomes more important than reality. So again, I think sometimes, I used to laugh and I say, okay, and I don't want to offend anybody that does this. If this is what you believe in, it's what you believe in. But like, if your kids wear a suit and tie to a game, is that for them or you as a coach? Is that so that people will say, oh, look at this class act program, they're wearing suits to games? Because I've never met a kid yet, and I'm sure there is somebody. I've met very few kids that want to wear a suit and tie to a game. Hey guys, tomorrow for this game, would you like to dress up in a suit and tie? I mean, my guys are going to be like, well, heck no, I don't want to do that, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to do that either, really, so to me, some of those things like that in terms of how you dress to a game. And to me, I'm much more concerned with what it is than what it looks like. So like wearing your uniforms, like you said, out into the crowd or whatever, I do have a problem with that because I don't look at that as an appearance thing. I look at that as when you put that uniform on, you got to be ready to play. We're not putting a uniform on just to stroll around and go to the concession stand. We're putting the uniform on to go play. So I think that's more of an attention to detail thing than an appearance thing. So, that's something, I do feel strongly about. But again, I just think some of those things, Shane, I mean, like the pressure or the added stress on coaches. And this is one thing I don't think we really talked about in show 23 much. It's funny, you do a show and then you look back and think, oh, we could have talked about that too.
Mm-hmm.
But how about the stuff like all the other stuff you got to worry about on a game day? That happens a lot to coaches. I mean, it's like you can't just show up and coach. I mean, you're either, let's say it's a road game. Okay, what time's the bus leave? Okay, what do we have all the stuff packed up? I mean, what do we have to take with us, right? We got to take certain equipment with us. We got to make sure we take an extra uniform with us in case we get blood on a jersey, or we got to take what's the pregame meal, right? Is someone feeding the kids before we go? I mean, there's all these things, these hoops you got to jump through. If it's a home game, do you have to help get your facilities ready? I guarantee, as a baseball coach, you do. I've
Mm-hmm.
never met a baseball coach yet that's not out there dragging the field, working on the field. That's just part of it.
Right.
Some basketball coaches have to help set the gym up, mop the floor, whatever. I mean, these are these pregame responsibility things that, again, when you're trying to get your mind where it needs to be to go compete, all of a sudden you're having to do all these little chores, so to speak, to get ready. And I think, Shayne, that adds to the stress. And I mean, before I get off on a tangent here, because one of the things, especially now, and I think, to be real here, it's just it is the time that it is. We've got to talk about the COVID stuff a little bit and the added stress and responsibility put on coaches due to it. But before I get into that, do you have any comments on that part of it? Do you think that's something, I don't know if that drives coaches to quit necessarily, but there are some added responsibilities that really add to the stress of it?
Well, I don't know if that's, quote unquote, what makes them quit, but I think the ongoing struggle, the ongoing beat down, the ongoing extra things can sometimes be the wear and tear that ends up, getting to that point. I guess what I would say is, don't you feel like it's where you have to maximize people? I mean, I know it's not going to happen maybe in your first year in the job, but the longer you're at some place and things like that, I think you've got to look around and recognize there's people want to get started. I know some of the most valuable people in our baseball program have simply been, some parents that are just willing to come work on the field. Hey,
Right.
I'll mow. Hey, I'll come out. I'll do this. Or, hey, I have some extra wood out in the shop. You need a bat rack there? We'll make you one, or a helmet rack. And sure enough, you'll show up the next day. Yeah. And I would say that's some of the things. If you'll work hard year round, you'll make your life a little bit easier. I'll give you just some basic things. Having someone to film.
Yeah.
I'll see some of these head coaches literally 20 minutes before first pitch or before tip or kickoff or whatever sport it is, they're running around nuts trying to get their equipment set up, their camera
Sure.
set up. They got to have this or that. Where you'll see these other programs, the head coach doesn't even know where it's at because there's someone completely in charge of it. They take it
Right.
in, they set it up, and then all that coach has to do is go get on huddle after the game, and it's there. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
so I think those stats are the same way. I'll see some coaches, I just don't have stats if I see the film or whatever, where other people, again, they have stats and there's programs or different things. Hey, coach so-and-so has that. I'll get it right to you. Here it is. And I see that in my media work. To me, Matt, that's going out and getting people. And I don't think you can wait to do it the night before the first game. I think that's something you have to look at these things that are tough on you, that are bugging you, that are wearing you down, and you got to ask yourself. I know that I definitely have done that throughout my career. I've from when I was younger, and some of those things that beat me down. I know when I got into my baseball career, and then now as a basketball assistant, I think one thing that makes me a good assistant is because I've been there, done that. I know
Right.
kind of how to help the younger head coach or so forth. So I guess that's what I would say. I don't know if you have any follow up to that, but I think that, when going back to last week, when you see these common threads and championship programs, I think it's where obviously they have an advantage of some success in winning and people want to be a part of it. But I also think it's the people that reach out and make them feel a part of it. Hey, you want to do my film? Here's a shirt, here's a hat, this, or, praising their work, that type of thing. So I know as an AD, you probably run into that. And I'm sure as a head coach, you have those people behind the scenes in your program that make life really, really easy on you in terms of certain areas.
Well, yeah, and they're crucial. I mean, you just can't survive at the high school level without a certain number of volunteers, because schools
Right.
just can't pay everybody that you need to take care of. And like you said, you're going to have people to do it out of the kindness of their heart. You're going to have people to do it, um, and you try to take care of them the best you can. But in all honesty, you can't pay them what they're worth, right? I mean, they're worth way more to you than what you can give them. But like you said, you try to do a couple things, whether it be a pass to the games or some gear or whatever.
Well,
But
real
yeah,
quick, for an example, like in 20 years of Vinton County, how many film people have you had and how many bookkeepers have you had?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, again, I'm in a unique situation because we've just had such great people that have done it for so long. I mean, I've really only had a couple bookkeepers in 20 years. And I've had honestly about 3 film guys, maybe 4 in 20 years. My current film guy's been doing it since he was a sophomore in high school in 2013. You know what I mean, or
Wow.
2011 or whatever. And here he is. He graduated high school in 2013, and here he is still doing my film. So how fortunate am I to have a guy like that who's continued to do it? And I understand that he won't be there for. That's the other thing. Like these people don't last forever because they're going to move on to other things eventually, and that's why you've constantly got to have people willing to help because it's those responsibilities, Shayne. It's that stress level on a coach we're talking about when you don't have those people. Because let's be real honest. You mentioned stats. There is a responsibility as a coach for you to have that stuff. It's not, to me, it's not a valid excuse to say, well, I've just been busy. Well, okay, but that's part of it. I mean, you have to have stats. If one, you have media outlets that are trying to do their job and you need to cooperate with them. And two, let's face it, you're trying to promote your own players, and you can't promote your own players if you don't get that information out. I mean, on your website you do stats, right? I mean, you do league leaders in football and basketball and baseball and volleyball. And guess what? If those coaches don't send you stats, in essence, they're shorting their own players. I mean, they are taking away positive recognition from their own kids that go out there and bust their hump every day. I'm just trying to be real here. I mean, I understand that we all get busy, but don't you think we have a responsibility to our players? And so my point is, yeah, you have to try to get people to help you with this, or it becomes overwhelming. But you also have to understand when you sign up to be a coach, you're signing up for that. You're signing
Mhm.
up to talk to the media after a 20-point loss when you feel like going and hiding somewhere. You're signing up to get your stats in on time. You're signing up to call the radio show when you'd rather be doing anything else in the world but talking to them because you just got your butts whipped. I mean, that's just part of it.
Well, and I've talked to three different coaches, Matt, and inside the last month, from three different sports. Ironically enough, three different sports, and they've they've talked to me about stats. And a common thing I'm hearing is, what advice do you have if you feel like stats are starting to become an issue in terms of team chemistry and putting a little bit more of that individual stuff into a team? And I know I have some different things that I've talked to them about, but man, you've been doing this a long time. And I think one of the characteristics of your program has always been that balance and the ability to, as you said, I think you mentioned on a previous show, a sign in your locker room about how you're talking about, surrendering the
Render
me
me
for
for we, yeah,
we.
yeah.
Uh, what advice would you give a young coach there? Hey, I'm trying to do all these stats here. I feel like it's maybe getting in the way of some of our team goals, or not necessarily the word selfish, but maybe just people maybe worried a little bit more about their numbers in terms of maybe the win and loss, or winning and losing, I should say.
Yeah, I get it. I'm not going to sit here and act like that's silly or anything like that. I think that's a real concern for coaches. I would say this. I think if that's truly an issue, your team chemistry is probably too fragile to be successful. In all honesty, I think that, let's face it, if something like that's really interfering, I don't know that your kids have what it takes to be a championship level team at that point. Now, because I think you've said it really well before in baseball, like if you can't be happy for your teammate who went 3 for 4 tonight, then we have real problems, right? I mean, if you're going to sit there in the dugout, if you go 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts, we don't expect you to jog to your car with a smile on your face, okay? But you can also be happy for a teammate that went 3 for 4, and I think this, it's like that with stats. I mean, if stats are going to be to if stats are to the point where they destroy your team chemistry, I don't know that you have team chemistry, quite honestly. I mean, and I think it can be something too that a coach can use as a way to build that. Like, look, we've got to be happy for this person. He's playing well or she's playing well. I think
Mhm.
she'd be the first to tell you. She's averaging 20 points a game. I think she'd be the first to tell you she wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't for you guys, setting a good screen, throwing her a pass, and that's how you can use that stuff to your advantage to build that chemistry.
Well, I know on the website we try to even put every different types of categories. In volleyball we highlight the hitter, the defender, both the block and the pass.
Right.
The setters, the servers. In basketball, Matt, we take it all the way down to the final category of charges taken.
Right.
What I mean? So it's
Right.
we try to do that. So I promise I get some of that into the show. I'm glad we touched on that. I think that you and I are spot on. I think the stat sheet can really improve your sports IQ. Remember, you and I talked about new school and old school there a while back on a previous show, and
Right.
I think we talked about not knowing the game as well and the IQ and not watching it. I think the stat sheet can really educate you on some things and so forth. But I want to transition back to the end game, because I know you had a different route you wanted to go to. Kind of take us there and talk to me about a couple things.
Well, again, it's based on feedback. And like we talked about, I had some feedback asking me about the whole COVID situation. And the funny thing about it is, if you listen to all our shows, we've talked very little probably in 25 shows about the COVID-19, because
Right.
most of what we talk about, we feel like is more of timeless stuff, truths, stuff that's been going on for years and years, stuff that will probably go on for years and years from now. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to separate yourself from this in some of these areas, and this game management stuff especially, because like somebody asked me, like, how much is this COVID, the extra stuff that ADs or coaches have to do? Like somebody said to me, I bet it's a miserable time to be an AD right now with all these, and I get it, I do. It doesn't bother me all that much, because I just learned over the years you sort of roll with it and go, but I mean, there are people that want to quit. There are people that are frustrated. There are a lot of extra hoops you got to jump through right now. And that's filtering down to the coaches, because as an AD, I noticed it. I noticed a lot of the things I had to do, Shane, in terms of game management right from day one, when I'm out there taping off certain bleachers that you weren't allowed to set in and certain bleachers that you are, and making sure that this stuff's been sanitized and we've got the seats separated on the bench, all these things you try to do. But then I started to think, man, this stuff's affecting coaches too. I don't think we can forget about them in this, because I'm sitting here watching my football coach try to do his job on a sideline on Friday night, and then he'll turn around and yell, "Guys, spread out, on the sideline," because we have these OHSA inspectors that show up to football games, and they're watching. And
it made me think of, you have the get back coach. You might need the social distance.
It's funny.
Coach.
I said that. I said, hey, the get back coach has become the social distancing coach, man, over here on the sideline. I mean, here's what I've noticed in all this. Okay. And I think that this is probably the most frustrating part, is there's some things that we're being asked to do as AD and coaches that are necessary, and I think good. I mean, I had a talk with our football team the other day, called them all down, stood in front of all 40 of them, and said, look, we got to make sure we're wearing our masks in the locker room, because in all honesty, I think wearing your mask in the locker room makes sense. Okay, we're trying to locker room. Anybody that's ever been in a locker room, it's sort of a tight environment. It's not always the cleanest environment, right? So keep the mask on. Let's do the smart thing here. Not only are you preventing the spread possibly of this virus, maybe you're preventing other sicknesses too right now, right? Just keep that mask on around your teammates while you're in the locker room, getting dressed. It's not hard to do. All right. So we talk to our kids about this, but I think what's starting to happen, I'm seeing like frustration start to sit in amongst coaches and players, in the sense of, okay, look, you're telling me to do this and we're doing it, but it's never enough, because once you tell me to do this, now you're telling me, oh, make sure you do this as well. Oh, you better do this too. And all of a sudden, you said it earlier, I think you said something along the lines of, if you try to focus on too much, you can't focus on anything. Like the bad habits start to set in. You were using an example. I can't remember what it was now.
The quality and the quantity discussion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So now all of a sudden with this whole COVID thing, it's been more quantity than quality. It's been, I'll give you some examples. I mean, we start, okay, we ask our football players, wear your mask in the locker room. And every football coach and AD can tell you this, but if you go out on the field, the OHSA inspectors show up. Man, we got to make sure your guys are spaced out on the sideline 6 feet. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, but in my mind, I'm thinking they just tackled each other on the field. They rolled around going for a fumble. There was 11 of them, spit flying, mud flying, you know. But if you come off the field, by golly, don't give a high five and stand 6 feet apart. My point is, again, I think we need our people to focus on the important things first and most, rather than, maybe a better example is this. I remember when we got the return to play stuff, you remember back in like the summer when you could start working out again with your basketball players, Shayne, and you could get back into the gym and start doing things. I know everybody was different in terms of what their local health department stuff wanted to do, but I know, we talked about, okay, what do we got to do? Well, we got to make sure the coaches clean the basketballs after a workout. Okay, that makes sense, right? Spray them down. Let's spray the weight room down after we lift, and all that, and just and all that stuff to me made perfect sense. Let's be a little cleaner. Let's make sure we sanitize stuff. But then it started to get taken to a new level. I know I was asked to spray the nets after basketball workout. Think about that. I was asked to reach up, spray the nets down, like so COVID is going to stick to the ball, then dangle from the net for like 30 minutes until the next group comes in. I mean, it just starts to get silly. My point is this. My point isn't that I'm too lazy to spray the nets. My point is we start missing the point. We start missing the things we should be focusing on. And we become sort of jack of all trades, master of none. You see what I'm saying? I saw today, Shayne, where I think Kentucky, did you see this? Has opted to not have the jump ball in basketball this year. Did you?
Oh,
did you
high school. Yeah, Kentucky high school. Yeah.
They're going to flip a coin. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, wait a minute. So the jump ball's so dangerous, but like after the coin flip, then we're going to box each other out. We're going to play defense. We're going to dive on a 4 for a loose ball. But boy, we're going to avoid that jump ball. I mean, shoot, we may not even need a vaccine, Shayne, if we can just avoid the jump ball. I mean, that's it's like, I'm not trying to go off on a tangent here, but don't you see the silliness in some of this? But my point to this show that we're doing tonight is this. We've talked about picking your battles, right? We've talked about that, the importance of picking your battle, paying attention to detail. I think some of that's getting lost right now in our game management, and that's causing this stress on coaches because they can't keep it all straight. We're not giving them 1 or 2 things to focus on and think about. We're giving them 10 or 12 things to try to focus on and think about. Right. And I'm going to be real honest with you, and this may offend some people. Some of this is for show because, again, there's stuff that we're doing to keep kids safe. There is the mask in the locker room, the sanitizing of equipment and stuff, keeping things cleaner. Those things are real and they're important and we should do them. But some of this stuff, like standing 6 feet from each other on a football sideline after you've ridden the bus and practiced together all week and tackled each other on the field, or telling your cheerleaders to spread out when, again, they went to school together all week and they've cheered together all week. Don't you feel like some of that's for appearance factors? Like, look, we're really trying to do the right thing here. Look at this. And I'm not blaming schools because we're being told to do it. I'm not even really blaming health departments because they're being told to do it by the governor's office or whatever. The OHSA the same way. The OHSA sends these inspectors to our games. They're just trying to jump through the hoops to keep people above them happy so that we can continue to play. So I respect that. I don't have a problem with that. But what I'm saying is ultimately all this stuff is falling on coaches and it's making their job way, way more stressful and almost at times undoable in terms. I don't even think coaches can do all this stuff, quite frankly.
There's 2 ways I go on that as I was really listening carefully to you. I
don't
disagree.
Listening to my rant and trying to make sense of it.
No, in all honesty, I had 2 avenues of thought here in terms of pretty consistently through all that. I can't totally disagree with what you're saying. So I guess I'll say this first. I have a hard time when I'm talking to fall and then now winter coaches, and I'm a winter coach as well, but obviously I'm a spring coach. When you go through what my particular team went through last spring, sure. I have a hard time feeling sorry, and I don't even know if that's what you're asking me to do there. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying I have a hard time looking at a fall coach or a winter coach who's getting the play. You know, fall football coaches are preparing for their 5th game.
Right.
Volleyball, I don't know where your league is or where, you know, I know we have people listening all over Ohio, even a couple out of state.
12, 14 games in.
Right.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to start second half tomorrow night. You and I are recording here on Wednesday night. We're getting ready to start second half tomorrow night. So I have a hard time feeling sorry when in a baseball situation, particularly the year that we were hoping to have, you know, we didn't get it all. So sometimes I'm the wrong one to ask when it comes to the fall and the winter coaches doing a couple of these extra things. Okay. Now, sometimes, and I've really worked on myself professionally, I understand as I'm gearing up for another, what I hope is a new baseball season this spring and a new basketball season this winter, that I have to let that go, and I've got to stay focused the same way I would ask my athletes to, right, to get going. The second thing, I guess, I would tie it into the night show is, I think, again, you have to be proactive and you have to try to figure out some procedures and policies. I know one thing we've worked really hard at school is getting different people in charge of different things. And I've tried to empower my students. Look, guys, I know this isn't perfect or whatever. At the end of every class, I need you to be just in simple charge of wiping off this, and this. That's it. You know what I mean? And we do that every period. Every period we have a procedure we follow. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes. And we do it. And I guess I would tell coaches, I know at the college level, Matt, there's some colleges, I don't know if you've read this. I was reading a fascinating article on ESPN the other day about some colleges have put some of their coaches, or they've even had hired advisors to come in and just evaluate how they're doing with the COVID-19 as coaches. You know, are there different things I can do when I address my team, or, you know, when we're celebrating different things, or whatever it is. And they're just wanting feedback on different things they can do. So I guess all I would say is finding different people you can put in charge. Unfortunately, what happens is at the high school level, it all falls back on the head coach.
Right.
At the end of the day, you said it yourself. You're probably the one cleaning this. You're probably the one going and getting these supplies. You're probably the one, and it does. It becomes overwhelming, and then all of a sudden you're trying to run a practice that's supposed to start at 4:00, and here it is 4:08, and you're still trying to follow protocol because you might not even have the resources you needed in the first place.
You make a great point, and I wasn't, and I probably did come across that way, Shayne. Like I was like, you know, man, we should feel bad for these coaches. And I really wasn't trying to come across that way, because I get what you're saying, right? I mean, I think most coaches would even say that. Like, I guarantee if you talk to our football coach or our volleyball coach, they're going to tell you, man, we're just thankful we're playing. You know, we want to be playing. Right. What the point I was trying to make was this: it's like the problem is there are a couple specific things that I think need to happen to keep kids healthy. Okay.
Yes.
With this COVID deal, for instance. Okay? Yes. And what my fear is when we take 8 other little things that don't really matter that much, but are more for appearance, and we pile those on, what happens is the coaches sort of get distracted and lose focus on the important things. That makes sense. So now,
well, I think the kids do
now
too,
instead of keeping kids healthy, same way with kids, because I see it in kids. Like, we tell our kids to wear the mask in the locker room. Okay. Well, if we told them that, like if we said to our kids, listen, the focus is masks and the focus is keeping your hands clean, you know, then we could just narrow that focus down and get that done. But all of a sudden now we're telling them 10 different things. Oh, make sure you do this. Don't high five. Stand 6 feet apart on the sideline. So we're giving them so many things to think about. You know what eventually happens is people take this defeatist attitude of, I can't win this battle. No matter what I do, you know, we'll lose. I mean, like when the OHSA inspectors come, man, I don't know if you know this or not, Shayne. To pass, you have to get 95% success rate to pass. Like, one of the inspectors even joked with me. He said, how would you have done in high school if 94 was an F, you know? And I kind of laughed. I was like, not very well, you know, because I 95 and above wasn't really my thing. But in all honesty, we've set ourselves up for – so what happens in that situation is, man, I thought we did everything pretty well the other night, and we got this terrible report back. So now you sort of hang your head, and it's like, screw it, we can't win for lose. I mean, we just can't do this stuff, you know. And too many people just throw their hands in the air at that point. So I wasn't really saying feel sorry. That's not what I was trying to say. I was trying to say I think coaches, ads, players have become distracted, and it's like that. Forget the COVID thing for a minute, right? What if, as a coach, you asked your kids to be really, really good in 10 areas? Probably not going to happen, right? If you ask them to be really, really good in like 2 areas, I mean, like I heard one guy say it really well one time in terms of basketball. He said, if I come into your practice, I should be able to figure out what your number one focus offensively is, what your number one focus defensively is, you know, because that should be obvious. I don't think it should be as obvious what your 7 focuses are on offense and what 7 focuses are on, because kids can't handle that much. And I think with this thing, we're sort of asking them to do that. And, you know, you mentioned school. Let me ask you this, Shayne, too. I think schools are doing, and I think, again, this goes back to that whole thing, a little bit of being more concerned with what it looks like than what it is. Don't you feel like what we're doing inside of our walls every day is truly for the health and safety of our kids? I don't know about you, but like at our school, I don't feel like we're doing anything for show. You know, I feel like, you know, we've got the kids wearing masks. Like you said, we're spraying the desk off between classes. You know, we're trying to do things that are legitimate, like, hey, to keep you safe. But then all of a sudden you get into sports and it's that whole public eye
You're
thing.
in the
You've
public
got people
eye,
sitting in the
right?
stands now. So now it's like, oh, make sure you're standing 6 feet apart so that if there's a picture, I mean, people have said this, so-and-so took a photo and it showed 3 kids standing next to each other on the sidelines. Well, you know, it's football. I mean, it's football game. Sometimes teammates are going to stand next to each other, right? You know, but it's like that when it's in the public eye, and maybe that's a whole other thing with coaches too, Shayne, the standard they're held to, right, is part of the stress of the job, because everything you do is in front of everybody. It's like, you know, I've told my wife before, like when we have a bad day, I'm not saying feel sorry for me here, but like when I have a bad day at work, several hundred people see it, you know, and when most people have a bad day at work, it's just something they deal with their coworkers. And that's part of the job too.
That's interesting, because I think what happens sometimes is, you know, you might do it right 98% of the time that night, but like you said, that one possession or that one time on the sideline, that picture might paint an unfair picture in terms of your overall body of work. I think that's good stuff. I I'm really fascinated by this stuff in terms of the how this show, how Expanding the Zone continues to be such a professional develop for me. You know, we hope to be able to offer some of these things to coaches of all ages. I'm telling you right now, it makes me reflect every week, and that's why I want to start in on final thoughts, Matt, with you with this. Is I am amazed 25 shows in how, as I'm preparing for tonight's show, I'd literally made a connection to like 13, 14, 15 different shows we've done. I mean, I can honestly say that. And it's old school versus new school, and dealing with pet peeves and organizing yourself, and you know, looking back on times you thought you were burnt out or quit, or getting good people and good relationships and culture and all of that stuff ties together. And I think you make a really good point in terms of, if you don't learn to surround yourself with the right people, that to me is where you fight the unwinnable battle. At some point when you're fighting solo, things are going to catch up with you. I don't care how successful you are, because I've even seen successful coaches. Okay. I've seen successful coaches that from afar, when they're winning, I thought, oh man, they must do a really, really good job. Then all of a sudden you get to know them or whatever, and you're like, they're not organized at all. They don't do this. You know, they're miserable.
Right.
You know, I just met that person for the first time in 5 years. They're miserable. And it comes back to those types of things in terms of, we talked about relationships and all those things. So I think that the number one pull from tonight's show, as people have asked us to kind of revisit the 23rd show there on why coaches quit and on all these different topics, is you've got to figure out, what do I have time for? What do I want to invest my time for? Knowing I still have these other responsibilities. Okay, well, who can I go get to help me? Who's good at that? Well, who's good at that? Who's good at that? And then you have to go get them on board. You have to be a recruiter. You have to go get them, and you have to empower them to do a job. And I'm telling you, the parts in my career when I've been able to find those people, when I've been lucky enough to find them, I've seen the success rate go way up, and I know I'm a better version of myself.
Yeah, it's funny, Shayne. I've sat here and just sort of kind of written down bullet points as we went through the show tonight, because I feel like we've probably jumped around a little bit in this show. And I hope that we got our point across, because I think ultimately it does come down to just a few things. You just mentioned surrounding yourself with the right people. And I actually had written in my notes something very similar, like shrinking the circle. And what I mean by that is, like, what's your inner circle? Who are the people as a coach that, one, help you, right? You just talked about that offer you that help. And two, whose opinion matters, because you have to shrink that circle a little bit. I mean, your coaches, your players, whose opinion matters to you. Hopefully your
That's a
coaches
great
and
point.
player,
Yeah.
hopefully your coaches and players' opinions matter to you. But then outside of that, are you in a situation where your principal's opinion, your superintendent's opinion, I mean, maybe those matter, maybe they're not really that involved, because again, depending on the dynamic of your school, sometimes your administration sort of is more hands off with athletics. Sometimes they're in there with you. So that inner circle, who you going to listen to, who you going to talk to, because again, it can't be everybody, because then
Right.
distraction sets in. But you have to have those people that help. It's funny, the coaches that have done it for 20, 25, 30 years, you'll meet all types, Shayne. You'll meet some people and you'll say, gosh, I can tell that person's been in this a long time because of how organized they are and how sharp they are. And boy, they're just on point. And then you'll meet somebody else and be like, that guy, there's a mess. But he's got great people helping him. He's got a village over here helping him out. And he's a heck of a coach, on Friday night. And then he's got these other people to do that stuff. So it can, different strokes for different folks, right? I mean, it can work either way you look at it, but don't you think you have to recognize your weaknesses and make sure that if your weakness is time management, efficiency, some of these things we think are really important, or organization, you better get some people on your staff or next to you where that's their strength.
You used the term truth teller there a couple of weeks ago, I think, and I'll tell you right now, like what you said a second ago, really makes a lot of sense. Is if the person up in the 15th row thinks you're lazy and you don't work very hard, well, that is what it is. But if one of your players or your assistant coach thinks you didn't work very hard this week, well, that takes on a different meaning, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because those are the people whose opinion matters. I mean, uh, if somebody who comes to 5 games a year thinks that, we weren't prepared on a Friday night, then that's what they think. And okay. But if your players think you weren't prepared, now you got a problem, because they're like, Coach, why weren't we prepared?
Right.
And so I think you have to understand, like, again, it's almost, with all this stuff, Shayne, it's almost narrowing the focus. It's like, who do I have with me? Who matters? What battles am I going to fight? What things are we going to focus on in terms of even X's and O's, right? What are we going to be good at? What areas of the game are we going to, it's, again, you've coached different sports, and the teams that hang their hat on defense, the teams that hang their hat on, like in baseball, well, this team runs the bases and steals a lot of bases. This team hits for power. This team builds around defense and pitching. Everybody has sort of that, but whatever that is, you narrow the focus, and that allows you as a coach to stay sane, because I think to last in this business a long time, that's the only way you can keep yourself from going crazy. But if you're pulled in too many different directions and you get too many things going on, you'll burn out. I mean, it's just too difficult.
Well, it is, and there has to be an adjustment. You've tied all that into COVID a little bit, and the different,
Right.
common culture we're
And
doing.
that's a unique situation right now. But I
It
think
is.
even over the long haul, there hopefully won't be another COVID, but there's always going to be something, right? There's
Well,
always going to be some distraction.
it's the adjustment. The last thing I had in my notes, and I probably should have tied it in earlier on. I certainly don't want it to go unsaid. Here on the YouTube channel, the SVC Sports Zone Shayne, if you'll notice a long list of different interviews and some games that we call and so forth. If you scroll all the way back to the beginning of fall, you'll see one with the Lovely sisters. They're two talented players on one of the really elite volleyball programs here in our area, Adena High School. And they were telling me, if I remember correctly, it was Michaela. They were telling me clear back at the beginning of the year when I was talking to them about, creating some energy and different things. They were talking about how, look, volleyball is a game where we celebrate. We constantly are slapping and doing different things. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're not supposed to. And it's a weird vibe and it's a different energy. And I think kids had to totally adjust it. So I think sometimes coaches are adapting to what they have to do and the job they still have to do within that environment, the same way kids were talking about it. Right. You'll hear professional athletes talk about, the NBA guys in the bubble or these baseball guys, playing in empty ballparks. And right. And I think it's all about adjustment. I've heard you use over and over and over, the creativity. The people who are creative will be the people who are successful through this. And I think that's true for all adversity and all different things that we learn. So in my organizational notes, I wanted to share that because that was coming from an athlete who was being very honest, I thought, in terms of, right. Hey, we didn't have the energy tonight. We've got to figure out a way to create that and do those things. So I really enjoyed that interview, and I thought it made a lot of sense. So, Matt, that wipes out my notes. You look down through there on the final thoughts. Anything that we're missing here tonight?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it. But here's the thing. I thought we covered it a couple of weeks ago, and we didn't. So because right. I mean, in all honesty, there's just things you forget sometimes, and that's where we really appreciate the feedback. I think when people, this show here wouldn't have even happened without feedback because we wouldn't have thought to go this direction, quite honestly. So we appreciate people asking those questions, giving us that feedback. Hopefully we didn't repeat ourselves too much, but hopefully we hit on some new areas. Here's the thing. It's not a clean cut subject matter, is it? I mean, it's sort of it's one of those subject areas where there's not a manual necessarily for this. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of opinion involved in this. There's a lot of differences in approaches. And let's face it, there's people that do it totally differently and have success, right? I mean, you might do it one way, I might do it another, but I do think there's some of those, we called our show Common Threads last week, but there's some common threads here too of, no matter how you do it, there has to be a certain level, like we talked about, of efficiency, of organization, of time management, different approaches, yes, but I think some of those things have to be there no matter what.
Absolutely. And I know this show kind of, as you said, through the feedback, ended up jumping in here to show 25. I know we have 2 or 3 really good topics pretty much ready to throw out, and we're probably about a month away from the highly anticipated show in terms of state of the game for basketball. I know the state of the game for football was one of our biggest numbers in terms of people listening and commenting and different things there. So I know the basketball show, we might even have to do a 2-part series there. And if we do, that's awesome. That's what we'll do. So keep throwing the feedback. admin1@svcsportzone.com is our email. You can look us up on Twitter, Facebook. I know a lot of our feedback, Matt, just comes simply through my Facebook Messenger. Had a Twitter message this past week. Again, that's svcsportzone.com. Just look us up there. But guys, can't thank you enough. We're 25 shows in, and we feel like we've got a lot of really, really good topics to come, and we want to continue to hear from you. So on that note, we're going to get on out of here, and we appreciate everybody listening and watching to Expanding the Zone.